Now I'd like to recognize my friend from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and thank you to the witnesses. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this interesting bipartisan issue today. But that being said, if we want to talk about education and workforce data infrastructure, we should talk about what's happening with the dismantling of the Department of Education. The Trump administration's fired more than half of the department's workers without cause, and now the secretary is using interagency agreements to illegally transfer essential offices and operations, including the Office of Post-Secondary Education, to other agencies. I also submit, I think we should be talking about that, but we should also be talking about the critical issue of AI in education and the privacy and security and bias issues. We're not doing that today. This is an interesting conversation. I want to note that I have some questions and concerns about LERs, learning and employment record systems. I'm interested, especially in what kind of worker protections are incorporated into the design. I saw something about college transcripts, and as someone who didn't have a traditional college path, as someone who has a constant contact with people in higher education, I'm a little concerned that we're putting a lot of pressure on students. I can tell you there's some people who have not so great college transcripts, but they have amazing skills like communication, collaboration, critical thinking, all these things that are harder to measure. So I wonder, I mean, Digital Promise, which is a bipartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating innovation in education and workforce development, which is a good thing. They surveyed a wide range of workers about LERs, and many of them were women of color who had experienced discrimination. They expressed a lot of concern that the additional amount of available data, including age and gender, that could increase the chances of discrimination. That's a problem. I wonder how much control someone has. Is like, oh my gosh, what if you got grades that you weren't really crazy about, but that doesn't mean you don't have the skills for, or the, not the interpersonal skills as well, as Mr. Desaulnier was mentioning. So I'm trying to wrap my mind about how that works. Digital Promise also identified 5 key design principles. One of those is giving individuals control over how their information is shared, but what I want to know is, do they control what information is shared? And another is the safety and privacy concerns, which I mentioned are sort of surrounding this huge looming AI issue. So I think I'll ask Mr. Cheney, and then if there's time, others can weigh in. Why is it important for LERs to be explicit about who has access to individual information and how that information is used? Should individuals have the option to admit any sort of demographic or personally identifiable information? Because I think about what if someone is a victim of a crime, or what if they're a dreamer or undocumented, or a survivor of domestic violence. There's a lot of categories where people might not want a lot of the information shared. And how do we address this notion that what might be shown on paper doesn't really measure whether somebody has the sort of 21st century job skills, which is the sort of creative critical thinking. So if we want to start with Mr. Cheney.
Yes, thank you for the question. So absolutely, one of the foundational elements of an LER has to be both privacy and security, but self-sovereignty. I get to decide what I share, which is basically what happens now. Everyone is going to draft their resume to meet the needs of that particular job they're applying for. An LER simply is a way to digitally store all of your experiences, maybe not the great grades that you had you want to share, but the fact that your last boss recognized you and gave you a digital badge for great teamwork. You led that project really well. That may not be a certificate, but it may be a digital recognition that you got from your boss that you want in your LER that you can share with that next employer. But
well, you could also put that on a resume.
You could, but now we have it digitally, and it's there as a record. So it's simply a different way of sharing this. But self-sovereignty has to be foundational to what we're putting in place. And that's why I think that it's one of the standards that Congress can help us make sure is in place for setting up a national LER system, or those kind of requirements.
Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in the final second? Yes.
Yeah, can I just, I think this is a really important topic, because I think one of the key differences is that in a resume or a LinkedIn profile, this is you actually deciding and declaring that I have these skills, et cetera. That's very different than having verified and validated competencies and particular skills. And so even in the case of where you have an employer who's in fact signaled that this individual has these particular skill sets, that employer is actually verified of being able to write that to your actual digital transcript Now, the other thing to your question is like the individual also has the right to accept whether or not they want that on their digital transcript. Meaning you don't just automatically have to take everything. You're still the principal. You are the one who's in charge of what's contained within it, what of that information you want to share with others, et cetera.
That's really helpful. And as I yield back, Mr. Chairman, I do want to note that I have a bipartisan No Robot Bosses Act that I recently introduced to address the seriousness of employers who are using AI with no human to scan resumes coming in or job applications coming in. I invite my colleagues to take a look at that, and I yield back.
Thank you.